It's my great pleasure here to invite Francisco Torres for the first of our double billing which we have today. This is a book launch for a book here which you have in front of you, which is really inspired by and dedicated to Max Watson. And so I'm very pleased to be able to have one of the co-editors here who will talk to us about this. Francisco, to read this, has many, many titles, many degrees, and so on. So
skip that. Well, you don't have a great thing. You have to fill in with many small things.
Okay, all right. Well, it's many, many degrees from the European in a PhD in European political economy from the Catholic University in Lisbon. MSc also in economics from there, and MA in international affairs from Johns Hopkins, and on. At the moment, he's visiting senior fellow in the European political economy at the European Institute of the LSE, and a senior member and long-standing PEFM associate here. Also visiting associate professor at the new university in Lisbon, and on the EU steering committee of the European Consortium for Policy Research. So multiple backgrounds and present. And please, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. It is indeed a great pleasure to be back at this place, at home, basically, the European Study Center, and working with PEFM, and especially presenting a book, this book, which is called Governance of the European Monetary Union. I have only one copy, which will be for Jenny, Max's wife. Unfortunately, the publisher didn't manage to come here to sell a few copies, but one is in the library already. And the book is a product of things that we have done here. In fact, the book is in honor of the memory of Max, and treats a great scholar and policymaker who showed us the true value of interdisciplinary research and cross-disciplinary conversation. Nothing more appropriate to characterize Max. In fact, when I came here the first time, Manette and I were just senior fellows, and everybody was just saying, yeah, you should see someone, Max Watson, a fellow Max Watson. You should have lunch with Max Watson. And I said, we were a bit intrigued. Everybody would send us to Max. Finally, we met Max and said, Max, could we have lunch? Certainly, we should have lunch. And we went for lunch, and that started a great friendship. And many things we did together and learned a lot. And I have to tell this story because I think Max had the habitude of coming here by car and either stop by Russell at his flat and have breakfast and discuss things before coming here. And we all, the three of us there in this office there around the corner, or stop by at my place and have tea and discuss a bit things. So the first time you said, do you want some tea? Yes, of course. He said. And then I had organic tea. I said, oh, organic tea. Don't you have normal tea or something? No, I only have organic. But next time, but I can have a coffee. Okay, no, then I have a coffee. No organic, please, just a coffee. Then it was espresso, and he was like, oh, coffee. Okay, no, I go back to the tea. And then he didn't try it, but I on purpose bought, the next time I was asking, we have to buy English tea, English breakfast tea, English tea, so, and but organic, and bring it so that Max can have something decent to drink. And that is the little thing I wanted to say. Well, in fact, and plus this is, let me just go first here. No, okay. In fact, it's very important to stress the fact that Max could really talk on taking into account political constraints, the economic environment, and so on, and understand both, and work in the interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary way. So we could invite people for these seminars you organized, PEFM and others with the European Study Center on economic and monetary union, financial integration, and so on. And that was the idea of the book as well, to help us redress the balance and put economists and political scientists crossing their boundaries and talking to each other. And in fact, we asked people that then edit their chapters for the book, for the journal. There was previously a journal issue and then the book, to talk to each other and take into account the arguments of both disciplines. So this is just the contents of the book. So we have an introduction and a conclusion, and then all the others presented here, their work both in a conference organized as well with Max and in different seminars. The only ones that could not make it here was Javasi and Viplos, but they gave the paper. And then Lorenzo Binizimaghi was here, Mongelli was here, represented the other co-authors from the European Central Bank. Russell obviously was here. And in fact, Max was doing a paper with Calypso, another with me, and another one with Russell. And then he fell ill, and at the end we decided to recover old paper, or a paper that had been started by Russell and Max, and bring it together into the book. Ian Beck and Calypso was here, of course. And in fact, we merged as well. This was quite a work to merge, to have everybody included in the book. So, okay, Calypso was doing with a paper with Max that was not finished, so why don't Calypso come into merger paper with ours, Annette and mine, and try to do something to be in the volume. Eric Jones, which is the co-editor, Waltraud was here, Vidor Gaspar was here, and gave rise to, Russell was his discussant, and then in the next issue of the same journal, he published a paper criticizing Gaspar's views on the making of a continental financial system, lessons for Europe. David Vines, obviously, he was here and participated in the conference and various seminars, and then we conclude. But there were many other people that came to these seminars and conference that did not finally give a paper, but were here. Stephanie Ha, Jacques Caillou, Thomas Meyer, Kevin O'Rourke, and so on. And these basically, many were people from the financial sector, Pefm Associates, and so on. Obviously, Stuart and Chris Alsop, I see here Richard and Robin. So it's everybody that came around and participated in the conference and in the book. These are some of the seminars and conferences that were organized around this topic with Max at the center. And the third one, there is no Max. He was already ill, but I like very much that picture because we decided to take a picture and say hello to Max and send it to him. So it was kind of, get better and come back to the center. We're missing you. This is a seminar by Nicolas Véron that Max himself organized, but he could not be present. So these were great times. So what do we do in the book? We try to sketch 4 areas of attention that are well known in the political science community, and these areas are the framework for multi-level governance, the role of ideas in policy making, power politics and distributive bargaining, and the challenge of popular legitimization. And with those 4 areas, we have the 12 chapters or so, and in fact they all fall into these categories. It's very easy to know how we address, we take into account these 4 areas. Well, multi-level governance, we look from the failures of building a complete EMU from the very beginning. So why didn't you build a fiscal union? Why didn't you pay attention to the financial union? To the negative interaction between a large currency area and small fiscal authorities, decentralized fiscal policy. So problems of policy coordination, they all fall into this multi-level governance problematic area. The role of ideas, they are a focal point of coordination, of course, and depends very much how you interpret policy making. And one very critical, very much based upon ideas is the paper by David Vines. Obviously, is very much criticizing the way Europe is doing policy and coordinating policy in these days during the crisis. Power politics and distributive bargaining explains a lot of things. Probably does not fit in general in elegant models, but we have to take that into account because many or parts of the architecture of EMU were not working or not done from the very beginning because of that. And of course, there's a lot of reluctance for enacting reform because of that, right? It has a lot to do with power politics and distributive bargaining. And popular legitimation, of course, because the units of legitimation are not equal to in size and scope to the area, the economic and monetary area. So it means that these unions will engage in both power politics and distributive bargaining and fight over ideas about how the economy and institutions should work, right? Okay, so we have the Eurozone Club, 19 members. We started at 11 and kept growing. There was no exit until now, and we'll see. We have a referendum in Italy and so on, but it seems that the Italians are very much in favor of the euro, and because of the age pyramid as well, they would favor a stable currency because of their savings. So I don't know, even if there's a referendum by Grillo, so that not might. And in fact, there's a high support and a very stable support for the euro all over across Europe, right? Still, people are very much fond of the euro because it's a currency that gives some stability. Okay, so I'll start saying that we started with the incomplete Maastricht EMU blueprint, right? In the economic sphere, we only had the monetary union, but not an economic union, especially no financial union, no fiscal union. So the broad aspects of economic and political governance were forgotten, not given full consideration or rejected for lack of consensus. Fiscal union and financial union, and that shows in the weakness later on of EMU. So bank oversight stayed at the national level. Of course, monetary policy, because of that, because of the financial crisis, has to be reconsidered its role nowadays. We have a relative consensual narrative of the crisis now, which it took us a couple of years to arrive here, right? But this has been published, for instance, in Baldwin and Javasi, in an e-book by the CEPR, but as well is very much present along the chapters of this book. We all kind of agree in this consensual narrative of the crisis. We started to have economic imbalances, which is the background for almost any crisis. We had too much public, but as well private debt. It was borrowed from abroad compared to productive investment financed through borrowing. And it mostly went from Germany, the Netherlands, France, to the southern countries, Spain, Greece, Ireland. Ireland is not southern country, but peripheral countries. So there was a flow of debt from the center to the periphery, and mostly to non-traded sectors, right? Housing, government service, consumption, which drove up wages and prices and harmed competitiveness. Then there was a global crisis, and cross-border capital flow stopped, raising concerns about bank viability, in Greece as well about government. What made the crisis systemic was the close links between the banks and governments. Bailouts were not countries where the debt ratios were higher. Only in the Greek case this was the case. But in countries where there was high foreign borrowing, so current account deficits, so highly dependent on foreign lending, these were the problematic countries. So the initial shock was a loss of investors' trust in deficit nations. But of course, this was amplified by the lack of a lender of last resort, and many authors stress this point, namely Javazzi and Viplos, Paul de Grau, Russell, and others. The predominance of bank financing, of course. Banks were thinly capitalized and very large relative to the home country GDP. As well, banks with heavy investments in debt of their own governments, the so-called Dulu problem, and market rigidity that could not restore competitiveness akin to a currency devaluation. So countries had fixed exchange rates, they had no exchange rates, they had one common currency. They could not devalue, only internal devaluations. But why did they have these problems? In one way or the other, most papers, not all, stress the fact that countries had failed to internalize what was living in EMU, what were the initial objectives of EMU. They joined EMU and then they forgot there were this long period, 10 years or so, where there was no pressure, no market pressure, and there was no building of enforceable rules. So this led to the procrastination of reforms. Lisbon strategy, Stability and Growth Pact, and so on was not really enforced. With the crisis, domestic policies were then shown inconsistent with the stated objectives and also unsustainable. And of course, in addition, economic, financial, and fiscal governance institutions were unable to, because economic and monetary union was unfinished, unable to handle increasing policy interdependence, and they were incapable of dealing with the sovereign debt crisis. So this was the fragility of EMU, which is very much stressed by Paul de Grauw and David Vines and others. There was also a problem of the appropriateness of policy response, right? And that derives from the fact of these flaws at Maastricht. We have a monetary union side that is very well defined, but the economic union side that was left incomplete because of this lack of consensus how to complete it. Gave rise to small incremental steps within the community framework, sometimes in the intergovernmental way in other occasions, namely because the UK objected at going everything in the community framework, for instance with the stability, the Treaty on Stability, to create an economic governance framework for a monetary union. So to have an economic union, not a standalone economic union, but an economic union that serves the purpose of a monetary union, a functioning and delivering monetary union. There was a very special role for the ECB, right? As a central bank, the ECB was very vocal. So we argue, several of us, that the ECB was not a mere agency. In fact, it was very much an actor in the political equilibrium of the entire EU, EMU governance construct. Non-conventional measures with conditionality, the case of OMT, gradual and structured effort to complete EMU, new supervisory powers, the banking union or the bank half union, strategic political interactions with member states and other institutions, even the Bundesverfassungsgericht. The ECB was in the midst of the policy process to sustain monetary union, and it still is, in fact. So it's a very strange animal in that sense. It's not a normal central bank. It's a central bank that has to deal with many different partners and is a central bank in the midst of an incomplete economic and monetary union. We know the actions of the ECB and the intervention of Draghi. And however, the ECB cannot do everything. So monetary policy did a couple of things, but cannot address structural problems, can only address cyclical issues, right? So the ECB has stressed over and over that in order to put the economy on a higher growth path that requires well-functioning markets, modernization of market institutions, you need structural reform. And it has been very vocal on that. So you need structural reform because of you have to create resilience against shocks. This is optimal currency area theory, and as well growth because of the crisis legacy costs and because of a crisis exit strategy. So everybody's, or no one denies in these chapters that you need structural reform and growth, but some authors stress more that than others. For instance, others, de Grauw and Vines, probably stress more the lack of coordination or the role of fiscal policy and less so the importance of structural reform. But even if you stress that, little attention has been put into long-term determinants of growth, its quality and approach, which I think is important, or we think as well, many in the book, that is fundamental to look forward in order to resolve short-term problems. We have to look to the long term. So we have, on the one hand, the five presidents' roadmap, a genuine economic and monetary union, attempts to increase ownership and effectiveness of reforms. So there were many suggestions building up an Euro plus pact, competitiveness authorities, and so on. And we have urgent institutional challenges that, in fact, are part of this consensus in the book. And as other authors, in fact, there's a lot of coincidence with other authors, Baldwin and Javasi had put forward more recently, already in 2006. What do we need urgently? Completing the banking union with the fiscal backstop, breaking the feedback loop between banks and sovereigns, securing Eurozone-wide risk sharing, coordinating fiscal policy while reinforcing its discipline. And some authors put the stress more on coordinating or a role for fiscal policy, others on not forgetting the discipline role or the need for consolidation in some countries. So countries are quite different. So even very recently, the IMF came again saying, well, there's a role there for fiscal, and the Commission now, for fiscal policy, but yeah, pay attention that countries are different. They are not all in the same boat in this. Some sort of sovereign debt restructuring mechanism, although here we have political problems on that. And ECB as a lender of last resort, plus more accountability for the ECB. This is as well defended by most authors. So all these proposals encompass the creation of some fiscal space at the Eurozone level and some sort of more or less limited program of debt consolidation and restructuring. So, but there's, of course, the fear of permanent transfers between countries, especially from Netherlands, Germany, and others, say, well, we create another Mesojordan if we go on like this. And, of course, advancing structural reforms to push the Eurozone more towards the, if not the optimum currency area, sustainable currency area. Still, even with all these, we have a kind of a model problem. As we know, even in a genuine EMU like the US, Economic and Monetary Union, you cannot prevent regional failures, right? We have the case of Puerto Rico that has been discussed in comparison with Greece, for instance, and nobody pays attention to this, or few people, but there's little criticism of the US dollar. You know, you don't say the dollar failed like the EU, like the euro, or the US government is lacking solidarity towards one of these regions. But in fact, Puerto Rico is left to the mercy of the markets, right? There's only one way to adjust. People leave the state and go to the continent to work, which they can do freely, right? But if the state is bankrupt, it's bankrupt. Of course, banks are not bankrupt because these are mainland banks that operate in Puerto Rico, so there's no problem. So we could have a credible non-bailout regime with banking union a la Bauter, for instance, and you rescue the banks in Greece, and the economy would work. Simply, you had a failed state there, and people in the public administration would have to migrate or so, but the country would start to work. Now, this would be a different model from the one we have now in the European Union. So this is a step forward. Would be changing to the American model, so to speak, and obviously we lack many other conditions to do that. So, but this is interesting to have it in mind because this is an example. Since we took lessons from the United States, from the history of financial integration in the States, probably we should look a bit more to this one. So, of course, structural reform has become more and more politically charged and entangled with austerity. So now is visually everybody criticizes austerity. We'll come to that probably in the Brexit debate. And probably that is why you say you need to create ownership of reforms. You need to disentangle reform from austerity. Now, how do you do that? Because since you don't have the pressure of the markets or of the troika, you know that countries stop immediately to do whatever reforms. Again, Russell has done this review of the troika and is probably following what countries are doing or not doing. I follow more or less, as at least my own country, but and understand that they don't do much. I mean, the troika leaves and that's it. It's over. And because you cannot stand any more austerity, but then you don't do any reforms and you don't distinguish between reforms and austerity. In fact, the only thing they do is a bit of austerity. Reforms they don't do. In Greece was the same problem. Like fiscal consolidation they still do because they reach the target and they can go to the credit say, well, we have done this, but reforms they don't do. And reforms have nothing to do with austerity, but they have to do with the conditions to modernize your economy and not to be pariah in the EMU, in the Eurozone, or in the EU. So the choice would be to move on to a sustainable growth path and to a fairer model of society. But that is very much internal to the countries and the way they are organized. And in a way, and this is a bit provocative, but the Troika, stressing a few things that were not well done in these countries, created the conditions for a more transparent political discussion within the countries, although everybody criticized the countries. So it had a democratic effect in these countries. We're just puzzled in London that the Minister of Finance for Greece, Tsakalotos, am I pronouncing well? Came to London and he was asked, why didn't you install a minimum income in Greece? Since even the Troika, the IMF, was asking for that because Greece has no minimum income and because of the harshness of the adjustment program, the less favored people were in terrible condition. And they say, no, we don't like that. We don't find it dignifying enough. So another reading for this answer is that, well, we prefer to, distribute the money ourselves. and not in an automatic way. And that has to do, of course, with a lot of clientelism and so on, that people thought the series at least would change from previous established parties. But it seems not. So countries criticize, and these type of things happen in Greece, but not only. So they criticize a lot the Troika, but the Troika, in fact, is a group of people of different institutions that come and say a couple of truths. I mean, they are not right all the time, but they foster public debates about things that are not in general discussed in these countries. And that was, in a way, useful. Losing this pressure, countries relax a bit and go back to redistributing whatever they have. So it is very difficult to move to a sustainable growth path, especially so in an economic environment in which competitiveness factors change significantly due to globalization, and is even more difficult to deal with the legacy costs from the crisis. I don't know. This is probably I found here what is a consensus of reading the crisis, of the urgent solutions, and of reading it from the lenses of both economists and political scientists. And I think in this we followed and paid tribute to Max, because he was able to do that in his activities here, especially after being a policymaker for so many years in different institutions. His research activities here in St. Anthony's in Oxford. Thank you.
Thank you very much.